The citizens of Venezuela have suffered for too long at the hands of the illegitimate Maduro regime. Today, I have officially recognized the President of the Venezuelan National Assembly, Juan Guaido, as the interim President of Venezuela.
I've decided to break diplomatic and political ties with the imperialist government of the United States. I will sign a diplomatic note giving all diplomatic and consular personnel of the United States in Venezuela 72 hours to leave the country.
Are you considering a military option for Venezuela?
We're not considering anything, but all options are on the table.
Does that mean you're considering those?
All options, always. All options are on the table.
OK, well, let's get more details now with Don Court. He joins us in the studio. Don, we were hearing from Donald Trump there, but there has been lots of international reaction too.
Yeah, absolutely. The Venezuelan situation is really heating up now. Just moments ago, actually, the Venezuelan military threw their support publicly behind the Maduro government and said that they would defend the sovereignty of the country. Now, it was specifically after Juan Guaido declared himself president on Wednesday that the international community took real notice. Many of the U.S.'s traditional allies immediately jumped on that bandwagon, calling for democracy in Venezuela. Most of the members were from the Washington-based Organization of American States, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, to name a few. But there were also Europeans as well, of course. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron happened to be one of the most strongest supporters.
After the illegal election of Nicolas Maduro in May 2018, Europe supports the restoration of democracy. I salute the courage of the hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who are marching for their freedom.
Now, ironically, just 2 days ago, his own government denounced statements from the Italian Interior Minister, when he expressed the hope that the French people would rise up against Macron. And the French government told Italy in response that they should sweep their own doorstep. But it seems like they didn't really listen to their own advice when it comes to Venezuela. Now, there were also international reactions calling for stability and caution in Venezuela. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov just said at a press conference that he was alarmed at U.S. talks of possible military intervention, especially amidst repeated U.S. confirmation of Guaido's claim to presidency.
We can see another intrusion into a sovereign country's politics. As you know, there have been several attempts to oust Nicolas Maduro. The fact that the US and a number of other countries, particularly in the region, immediately recognized the self-proclaimed president means they had a hand in the creation of competing leaderships. This can lead to chaos and a serious destabilization in the internal political situation.
Now, China also took a stand in opposition to external interference in Venezuela, and it makes sense because China is actually one of Venezuela's prime partners for energy production and gold mining in the country. Let's take a listen to what the Foreign Ministry spokesperson said.
China always maintains the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, opposing external intervention in Venezuelan domestic affairs.
So there's certainly a wide array of reactions and interests at play here. So I think it's safe to say that international reactions may play a large role in how this situation ends up unfolding.
Sure. And they do seem very mixed too. OK, thanks, Don. That was RT's Dan Court. Well, we spoke to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Russia's Federation Council about this, Konstantin Kosachev, who believes it is clear what needs to be done.
Any positioning in this very difficult and sensitive and fragile situation may cause further clashes and very dangerous developments. I believe that the model which now is being implemented in Venezuela is quite simple. First, to send signals to the civil society in a certain country that they live in worse conditions than any other country. Secondly, to blame the government of this country for the existing problems. And thirdly, to encourage the civil society of this country to go ahead and to start fighting the ruling authorities instead of seeking political compromises. This is what has been done in many other situations, like in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, and now it does happen even in Venezuela. Again, the Venezuelan society does experience obvious problems, but the position of the international community in that case should consist only in encouraging a political dialogue between the ruling authorities and the civil society in this country.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts now of Andrew Leung. He's an international and independent China specialist. Andrew, good evening. Thanks for coming on. What are your thoughts here? Why do you think we are seeing such a divided world when it comes to opinion about what's happening in Venezuela? Why are some countries asking for, well, clearly wanting some sort of political change and a change of leadership? Other countries are saying, no, no, you know, we need a more peaceful diplomatic solution to what's going on.
Well, I think that what is important here is not so much diplomacy, but the internal situation in Venezuela. I mean, let's face it, the whole situation is quite unsustainable, as Venezuela is suffering from a hyperinflation of 80,000% per annum. 80,000, I mean, per annum. This is really unsustainable. And that is underpinned by perceived lack of deficits in governance and also corruption and all sorts of things. But having said that, though, China has been extremely consistent, and also Russia, in upholding the principle of non-interference. In other words, you've got to let the internal political process to take its course. You know, whether or not a new president is to take over, it's got to go through the constitution of the particular country, and no country should be allowed to interfere in other countries' internal matters. Otherwise, it would set a very bad precedent all around the world. So that's what China has been consistent in upholding the principle, and so has Russia. I mean, all along so many years, so many decades. But then coming back to Venezuela, the situation is really unsustainable. There are so many people out in the streets, and inflation is as hyperinflation we have ever seen around the rest of the world, of 80,000% per annum. So something has got to be done internally.
Why do you think that Western countries are so keen to see a change of leadership there? Some people do say, look, it is hypocrisy, isn't it? Because you're so concerned about people interfering in your own politics. If you look at Macron and America and the accusations towards Russia, and yet here they are blatantly interfering in Venezuela.
Well, naturally, aside from the situation in Venezuela itself, the Maduro has been always been seen by the Trump administration as a thorn on his side, because Maduro is always has been adopting policies at odds with what America wants, and is seen as a kind of renegade in American's backyard. So it's no wonder that the Trump administration jumps onto this turmoil and try to install someone who is seen to be more sort of favorable to the stance of the United States. But having said that, though, I think that the principle must be upheld, as China is trying to do, and Russia, to make sure the local country is allowed to interfere in other people's matters. But having said that, I think the situation inside Venezuela is really very worrying, because Venezuela is one of the world's largest exporter of oil and energy, and it would upset the world market. And of course, any instability in Venezuela itself could spill over in that part of Latin America and beyond. So I think that the situation has got to be watched. I think what countries should really help the process, but not interfere, least of all by military means. And that would send a very, very bad example to the rest of the world.
And just briefly too, there's a flashpoint, isn't there, politically at the moment, because Maduro says he's broken off diplomatic relations with the US. He's told US diplomats to leave, but apparently they are refusing to leave, and they say that they don't recognise Maduro as the legitimate sort of president of the country. Potentially that could turn ugly too.
Well, yeah, of course, Maduro is right. I mean, obviously, according to the Constitution, if there's going to be an election, there's got to be for another president, then there's got to be a process to go through. You just can't, you can't dispose an elected president right or wrongly just like that. So he is right. But on the other hand, this action against the United States with the Trump administration's rhetoric against Venezuela, I think it spells trouble in this region. And that's why the countries like China and Russia have got to watch it very, very carefully. But I think both China and Russia has been very, very consistent in their stance in allowing in not condoning the intervention by foreign powers in the internal affairs of his country without going through the internal constitutional process of any country, because all these processes are different. Each country is different, and you must allow all these processes to take its course, even though the problem on the ground causes a lot of concerns around the world.
Sure. OK, Andrew, nice to talk to you. That was Andrew Leung, international and independent China specialist. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, meanwhile, Caracas has been swamped with both anti-government protests and rallies in support of President Maduro. At some of the demonstrations, there have been explosions, gunfire and clashes.
The protesters in Venezuela have decided to take things a little bit further. Instead of just blasting the president with violence and rioting, they've decided to declare themselves to be the government. An oppositionist and leader of the National Assembly has declared himself to be the interim president. But what about the people? An oppositionist has not won any election, and there's clearly not a consensus among the people on any of these issues. Now, at this point, it's starting to look like a civil war is a real possibility.
It's been preceded, this coup attempt by the United States, by several years of economic sanctions and by several attempts militarily by small groups of National Guard or Army individuals inside of the Venezuelan government to try to assassinate President Maduro. Maduro was elected twice. There were other opposition parties that were allowed to run. Some chose not to. And there are contending forces in the country. It's a polarized situation.
The USA is singing a song of democracy when it comes to Venezuela, but it's starting to look like they're marching the country towards civil war.